Hello all, Rick here. The USS Griffin NCC-1067 was a Constitution-class starship lost in 2253. With the rising tensions amid the Klingon Empire and Starfleet, it was assumed that it had run afoul of a Klingon attack and its entire crew was lost. However, no wreck was recovered, no survivors found, no admittance from the Klingons. Its entire crew was listed as MIA, from Captain Taggart to Chief of Security Harper and Dr. Gahor. Other theories included that the ship may have attempted to jump to warp in a damaged state, and a malfunction either dropped it into a different realm or dashed its molecules across the stars. But in 2262, its distress call was detected by an Enterprise shuttle as it made its way back from a leadership training conference, and an away team landed to attempt to answer the 9-year-old mystery and render aid. Starfleet's Investigative Department for Unique and Unexplained Phenomena, Division 12, now has taken over the task of uncovering what happened here, and what the cause was. Division 12 is one of several Starfleet divisions that tackle the unknown phenomena, like Division 14, which is responsible for unencountered or rare medical conditions. In the days leading up to the vanishing, Lieutenant Harper had begun accusing various crew members of being manipulated or compromised by something else. Whether she was correct or not, she too began to act erratically and was confined to quarters. Contained and panicked that she could not do anything against this perceived force that was overtaking the crew, it seemed she managed to escape and began systematically eliminating the perceived threats. She beamed the accused into space, phasered them, or simply strangled them, clearly afflicted by the same phenomena she sought to eliminate. In order for her to successfully do this, the rest of the crew must have been in a similar state of irrationality, as she was not confined again. However, escape apparently too was not an option, as all the escape pods and shuttlecraft were jettisoned. By the time of the ship's recovery by Division 12, there were no bodies to be found on the ship, apparently. Clearly, however, there had been follow-up boarding parties, as Klingon disruptor fire, Vulcan phase of fire and other burns were found throughout the vessel, suggesting that in the 9 years of its absence, other parties had attempted to board for salvage or to answer the distress call. But in those 9 years, the ship remained undocumented, meaning that no one reported back. It turns out that some entity did indeed make its way into the Griffin, something capable of numerous psychic feats and malevolent intent, and that it was responsible for all the deaths. What's more, it seemed to act as if the ship itself was sentient and desired to carry out these attacks on any who set foot on it. And whatever it was, utilised fear to do so. But understanding belies fear, so Division 12 has the unenviable task of answering just what is the Griffin now. For a start, the ship was on low power, with only about 1 hour of energy remaining. Yet gravity plating was operable, and some pressurised atmosphere existed, though it was not breathable until life support was restored. Lieutenant Spock detected no signs that the ship's gravity should be operable, yet it was. But this leads us to the next ability displayed, the ability to induce hallucination. You would think that the first illusion we witness is hearing the crying infant, Kirk's son, David. But only he hears it and dismisses it. This tells us two things. The noise was in his head, and that so was something else within minutes of boarding the vessel. His relationship with his son and Carol Marcus had been the last thing on his mind when he boarded, and now here he was, hearing his child's cries. But the illusions started even before this. On approach to the Griffin, the ship is in a notably better state than it ultimately is when it gets towed away at the end of the episode. so the illusions had already begun to affect the away team the minute they responded to the distress call. Soon though, the entire away team witnesses the figure of Lieutenant Harper walking away from them down a saucer section corridor, at a time when none of them knew who Harper was. So the projections were clearly not only created from what was found inside the person's thoughts, as Harper at this time was unknown to them. So the Griffin has a memory and the ability to use and recreate things. There were no signals of transporter activity and no phasing technology detected, but the form vanished, leaving only a faint trace of negatively charged ions. Not long after, their shuttlecraft was witnessed floating and destroyed in space, past the main view screen of the bridge. Another new fact emerges, that the Griffin can clearly manipulate the systems, and it sought to cut off any means of escape. But the positioning of the wreck is clearly there to induce fear. The bridge is at the opposite end of the ship to the shuttle bay, and the odds of it drifting right by the main viewer screen as the crew had made their way to the bridge? It was set up on purpose. Main power was also fluctuating. Consoles displaying logs would spontaneously activate and doors would seal to become unresponsive, all at calculated times. Further proof that the Griffin was manipulating the ship's systems. Additionally, the main computer would refer to the away team members by name and disregard their commands. Although once more, when it's apparent that hallucinations are present, it's possible that much of this is not as it seems. The doubt generates and fuels paranoia and terror, and the illusions created are there to facilitate and engender fear. The entity finds the victim's doubts, insecurities and fears and engineers situations, encounters and draws on their memories to stoke them. But what is worse is that clearly the deeper the afflicted engages with these fears, the greater the hold the Griffin has on them, even making them take actions without their complete knowledge. Because of this, draped in layers of uncertainty, hallucination, and embroiled in fear, it becomes increasingly difficult to understand what is real and what is actually happening. And then the more sway the Griffin has. On top of this, these hallucinations eventually begin to be able to manipulate and carry around objects, as seen with numerous flashlight uses and the use of Spock's own phaser against him. Although, once again, this could be accomplished by making the user carry these things, or even stun themselves with a phaser and the victim is just none the wiser, such as when Kirk tears apart the communications console he had been working to repair because he saw David within its depths, thus ruining the escape attempt. Kirk's insecurities about being an absent father are manifested through the cries and hallucinations he perceives of his son. The Griffin also conjures an away team to save him and the crew, including his brother George Kirk and Captain Pike. This, though, is another, longer form way of generating fear, as the hope of rescue is built up over hours, then stripped away once again as these are revealed as falsehoods too. La'an, however, is scared of her augmented heritage and believes that something has reactivated her dormant DNA. She fears becoming an ambitious tyrant like Khan. How true this is to happen, if merely the presence of augmented DNA will produce a psychopath, it's irrelevant at the moment. It's just her fear that the Griffin needs. So it begins to toy with her, comparing her role as security chief to that of Lieutenant Harper, her fear of failing to protect the crew. It then begins to seek to integrate her into its system of terror by arming her with Harper's knife and getting her to slash at an illusionary crewmate, accusing her of trying to subconsciously kill her team. The more disturbed La'an becomes at these events, The more fearful she is, the greater the influence the Griffin can exert, until she falls under its sway and relishes the freedom she finds in violence and spite. In fact, I think this is what is needed to deal with Kirk, as he continued to push on, though shaken, until La'an stabs him. What's more, while under the Griffin's complete sway, she states that David Marcus will meet his end in a dark corner of space at a blade. Spiteful taunt or no, this prediction would ultimately prove tragically true. Spock, meanwhile, has long struggled with his human Vulcan heritage. In his younger days, he thought of his human side as a weakness, but through the hallucinations with T'Pring we can see that recently he has been considering his Vulcan side as a handicap with his life, the cause of his failure in relationships and in the way of his career in Starfleet. But of course, it's not therapy, but fear the Griffin seeks to elicit, so these soon turn violent. What originally seems to be numerous projections tying him down to a biobed and threatening surgery on him to cut away his Vulcanness is soon revealed to be self-inflicted harm. The Force crew sent to rescue him also partake in building the fear by revealing deep-seated fears that Pike and Number One also have. Now Spock is aware of these fears in his friends, so they are able to recreate convincing representations of his friends losing themselves to the same madness. When Spock manages to center himself in his Vulcan teachings, the illusions melt away, revealing that his injuries were self-inflicted, and what's more, he is able to see that the formerly deserted sickbay is replete with other victims of the Griffin that had all clearly done the same sort of thing to themselves, all long dead. This is the biggest reveal, as it shows us that nothing they have witnessed since arriving on the ship has been as it seems. There may have in fact been numerous bodies littering the ship that none of them could see, and any readings that they have taken might have been false. It genuinely is troubling to understand that nothing recorded or perceived may have been the truth of events. For all they know, they may have been walking in a dream state since their arrival under the sway of the Griffin, and everything they just did to one another. Who says there were no readings? They could have just not had their tricorders on. Although Spock's return to a state of emotionless logic served to free him from his Gaius-like state, it should be noted that apparently other Vulcan crews have found the Griffin in its absence and joined the ranks of the dead, logic offering them only a short-term reprieve. As Division 12 hauls the wreck away, La'an witnesses one final image of Harper on board the vessel, shushing her, which adds one more unsettling notion. The Griffin had only 1 hour of power left, and for 9 years it hid away, luring in small crews to explore its halls before it claimed them. But now, with only 1 hour of life left in its systems, it is discovered, recovered, and hauled away to be studied at length by Division 12 of Starfleet. No doubt, it's very pleased with this outcome. Almost like it let them go, in the hopes of prolonging its existence. We could theorise that the transporters had some role to play in the dissemination of the corpse-like hallucinations. Perhaps they were actually physical matter, recreated by the transporters as tools of the Griffin, or perhaps some subspace entity had usurped the Griffin's main computer and turned the ship against them. Remains unclear. So that covers everything we know of the Griffin entity. It very much seems like some malevolent force has permeated the ship itself. Some event has contaminated the vessel and turned its crew against one another by drawing on their fears and manipulating their actions. And now that ship is almost out of power. It reappears on the horizon once more to continue its deeds. Thanks for watching this breakdown on the abilities and lore of the Griffin, and I hope you'll join us again for another video. I've been Rick, and until the next one, welcome home.